They said people with only high school diploma are a disgrace to the company, so I should go home. My twin brother, Jack, who had gone to the company orientation, came back home after just 30 minutes. What's that? Who said something like that? The expression on Jack's face, who had been so excited about starting his professional life, was dark. He was holding back tears, trying to write his resignation letter. Leave this to me. You don't have to give up because of something like this. But how? Later, when the employees found out my true identity after I disguised myself as my brother, they turned pale. My name is Ryan. I live with my twin brother, Jack. After losing our parents in an accident, we've been supporting each other all this time. Today is a special day for us. It's the day Jack takes his first step as a working adult. On the breakfast table, there are the usual toast, fried eggs, and coffee. Jack, munching on the bread, started talking with sparkling eyes. I'm finally debuting as a working adult. I'm so excited. Hearing those words, I smiled. It's rare to see my usually shy brother so full of enthusiasm. I took a sip of coffee and teased him a little. Just make sure you don't be late. Jack made a pouting face but quickly shot back. Don't worry. I've made sure I have plenty of time to get ready. That kind of banter was just like us. Even though I could feel that our peaceful life was about to change, I felt a little reassured. Jack was joining a rapidly growing company. Their new products had become quite the talk of the town, and you could see them often on the news and in commercials. I honestly felt proud that Jack was going to work there. But at the same time, I had a little worry about whether he would be able to adapt to the new environment. After breakfast, Jack changed into his suit and headed for the door. The way he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror made him look somewhat reliable, but at the same time, it was clear he was nervous. I walked up to the entrance and called out to him as he put on his shoes. It's finally here. Be careful, all right? Jack nodded, then glanced at the family photo hanging by the door. In the picture, our parents, who had died in the car accident, were smiling. Take care, Mom and Dad. His voice was small, but there was a deep sense of determination behind it. I looked at the photo and silently spoke to our parents in my heart. Please watch over him. Jack opened the door and hurried out of the house. When his back disappeared outside, the door quietly closed. After Jack left, the house fell into a sudden silence. The usual noise felt like a lie. I stayed in the quiet for a moment before heading back to the kitchen to brew a fresh pot of coffee. With a mug in hand, I walked to my desk. On the desk were papers and a computer, waiting for my usual work-from-home tasks. All right, I've got to do my best too. As I imagined Jack's new challenges, I sent him a silent cheer in the quiet room. I was focused on the computer screen when I suddenly heard the sound of the front door. The door opened, and I felt Jack's presence as he returned. But something felt off. Jack, who had just left, was already back. The orientation should have only just started. Hey, Jack. Why are you back? The orientation hasn't even started yet, right? I rushed to the entrance, but Jack kept his head down and didn't say a word. Usually, he'd respond with his usual energy, but now he couldn't even manage to take off his shoes properly. What happened? Did something go wrong? I asked again, but Jack remained silent. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were red and swollen, and I could tell he was struggling to hold back tears. Jack opened his mouth, his voice strained. They said people with only high school diploma are a disgrace to the company, so I should go home. That one sentence pierced through me. I understood immediately what had happened. But imagining how deeply those words must have hurt Jack made anger boil up inside me. What? Who said something like that? When I raised my voice, Jack shook his head without looking up. I clenched my fists, unable to find the words to continue. I knew Jack's timid nature all too well. He'd always tried to process his pain alone, never confiding in others, no matter how much it hurt. But this time, he couldn't take it. He had come home, struggling to hold back tears. That fact alone broke my heart. Why did they say something like that to him? I muttered under my breath, but Jack didn't respond, his head still down. I knew he was probably blaming himself, thinking this was somehow his own fault. But that wasn't true. I knew how hard Jack had worked, and it was painfully clear how unjust this treatment was. Why did someone who worked so hard and gave his best have to endure something so cruel? It took all my strength to suppress the anger welling up inside me. But now wasn't the time to show my anger. What Jack needed first was comfort. I took a deep breath, opened the fridge, and poured a glass of water. Handing the glass to Jack's trembling hands, I spoke softly. "Just calm down for now. Here, drink some water." Jack nodded faintly and took the glass with shaking hands. Watching him take slow, quiet sips, I felt a mix of anger and sadness surging inside me. I couldn't forgive anyone for hurting Jack over something like his education, a choice he never made willingly. But for now, my priority was to support Jack. I forced myself to stay calm and started thinking about what to do next. After finishing the water, Jack seemed to regain a bit of composure. But then, with a heavy sigh, he pulled a piece of paper and a pen out of his bag. "What are you doing?" Jack didn't answer and started writing something on the paper. A sinking feeling hit me, and I leaned over to look at what he was writing. The word resignation letter stared back at me. "Jack, why are you writing a resignation letter?" At my raised voice, Jack paused for a moment. But then, he resumed writing. "If I stay, I'll just cause trouble for the company. So, it's better if I'm not there from the start." His voice, low and strained, was accompanied by words that tightened my chest. Jack rarely let his weakness show, and when he did, he always turned the blame inward. I couldn't stand watching him like this. I grabbed the pen from Jack's hand and pushed the half-written resignation letter aside. "Don't be silly. You're not writing this resignation letter." Jack looked up at me with a surprised expression. I continued in a firm tone. "Leave this to me. You don't need to give up over something like this." Hearing that, Jack hesitated before opening his mouth. "But, how are you going to do that?" I nodded resolutely in response. "Don't worry. I'll handle it. Just give me a little time." Jack stayed silent, staring at me intently. I could see the anxiety in his eyes. But I could also sense his trust in me. My determination solidified in that moment. I couldn't let the company that hurt Jack get away with this. This wasn't going to end like this. I vowed then and there to take action for Jack. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, wearing Jack's suit, and tightened the tie. In the breast pocket was Jack's name tag. Looking at his name written there, I took a deep breath. "Jack, I'm going in your place today." After murmuring that, I glanced toward the living room. Jack was sitting on the couch, looking up at me. The fear in his expression spoke volumes about the deep scars left by yesterday's events. "Don't worry. Leave this to me," I reassured him. Jack gave a small nod, saying nothing. I couldn't betray the faint hope I saw in his eyes. Grabbing the bag Jack was supposed to take, I left the house. When I arrived at the company and walked through the entrance, the sight of neatly arranged desks and bustling employees came into view. The atmosphere was tense, but I carried myself naturally as I stepped into the space. I remembered how much Jack had dreamed of working here. But that dream had been crushed on the first day, and I couldn't let that slide. I was here to uncover the truth in Jack's place. Just then, a voice from behind stopped me in my tracks. Well, what's happening? I thought you wouldn't be coming back." I turned to see a middle-aged man in a suit standing there. He wore a faint smile and looked at me with a condescending gaze. His expression was a mix of mockery and disdain, impossible to ignore. Nearby employees passing by whispered to each other, "There goes Greg again. He's always got some snide remark for new hires." Hearing that, I immediately realized this man, Greg the manager, was the one who had hurt Jack. Well, I'll give you credit for coming back. I guess even high school graduates have some guts. His words made me clench my fists, struggling to keep my composure. There was no doubt now, this man was the one who had said those cruel things to Jack. But blowing up here wouldn't change anything. I needed to fully understand the situation first. Taking a deep breath, I responded calmly. "Good morning. I apologize for any inconvenience I caused." Greg smirked faintly, gave a curt nod, and walked away. But his attitude and words only strengthened my resolve. So, this is the guy. There's no way I can let this go. For Jack to chase his dream in this company, and for this man to take responsibility for his actions, I had to act. First, I needed to blend in as Jack. I'll become Jack and uncover the truth about this company. I told myself that and stared at Jack's name on the badge. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I resolved to take this step for Jack. Without even having time to process the incident with Greg, I headed to the desk assigned to me. But even on the way there, Greg's sneering remarks didn't stop. "All right, rookie. Make sure to work hard like a proper high school graduate." Every time Greg spoke, the surrounding employees would glance briefly in my direction before quickly averting their eyes. It was as if they were shrinking away, deliberately avoiding his gaze. That bizarre atmosphere made it painfully clear how much Greg's presence affected the entire workplace. I clenched my fists, holding back my anger as I arrived at the designated desk. Shortly after I sat down, Greg started addressing the entire department. It was the morning meeting. The topics centered around performance and future goals, but his tone was intimidating, almost suffocating. "Everyone, make sure you deliver results. This isn't a place where you can get paid for slacking off." None of the employees said a word. They simply nodded in silence. Watching this scene, I felt anger boiling up inside me again, but I couldn't let my emotions show. After the meeting ended and everyone began preparing for their work, a man sitting at the desk next to me spoke to me. "You're Jack, the new hire starting today, right?" His calm, kind voice gave me a sense of relief. The man, with a friendly demeanor, smiled as he introduced himself. "Yes, that's me. Nice to meet you. My name's Mark. I've been assigned as your mentor starting today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask." Hearing that, I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. At least this man seemed to be different from Greg, someone I could rely on. But that brief moment of calm didn't last long. Greg, noticing Mark and me talking, chimed in once again. "Ah, two high school grads together. Perfect. Make sure you both pull your weight." Mark's expression darkened for a brief moment but quickly returned to a smile. He leaned slightly toward me and whispered in a low voice, "Don't worry about Greg. That's just the way he is." His voice carried a hint of exhaustion. So, even Mark has been on the receiving end of Greg's treatment. I noticed the fatigue hidden behind Mark's cheerful facade and realized that Greg's toxic influence extended far beyond Jack. The real problem with this company. I need to dig deeper. Determined to understand the root of the issue, I focused on settling into my role. Mark patiently guided me through my first day. He patiently taught me each task step by step. When I asked questions, he never showed a hint of annoyance and carefully chose his words to make everything easy to understand. It left a strong impression on me. "This is your main task for now. It might seem tough at first, but you'll get the hang of it." His words carried encouragement, a stark contrast to Greg's cold demeanor. Whenever I stumbled or hesitated, Mark stepped in to help without a trace of irritation. "Take your time. Every new hire starts off this way." Mark's kindness gradually eased my nerves. After a while, Mark's expression grew serious. He turned to face me directly. "Are you okay? Don't worry about Greg, I'll protect you from him. Just focus on learning the job." His words carried a strong resolve, reinforcing his role as a dependable mentor. I bowed my head instinctively. Thank you. That really means a lot to me. Mark nodded with a soft smile, but I couldn't help noticing a shadow behind that smile. I observed Mark more closely. Although he outwardly appeared upbeat, his slouched posture and occasional distant stare revealed a deep-seated exhaustion. This guy, he's really pushing himself, isn't he? I wanted to say something, but before I could, Mark resumed explaining the tasks, so I held my tongue. Mark, despite being under Greg's thumb, continued doing his job while also shielding me as a new hire. His attitude was admirable, but at the same time, it made me worry about him. It's not just Jack. There are others here suffering too. I began to feel an even stronger sense of responsibility, not just to help Jack, but to protect the people in this workplace who were enduring so much. As I observed Mark's diligence, I couldn't shake a question that kept surfacing in my mind. Why would someone as capable and responsible as him stay under someone like Greg? Mark, why do you keep working at this company? Haven't you ever thought about leaving for somewhere else? It might have been an abrupt question, but seeing my serious expression, Mark paused thoughtfully before answering. To be honest, I've thought about it many times. But I'm a high school graduate too. I gasped at his words. Like Jack, Mark's educational background might have limited his career options. In this industry, education often defines how people see you. It's not easy to find opportunities as a high school graduate. He continued with a faint, bitter smile. And, well, I'm not exactly exceptional. I've always felt I just had to hang on here somehow. His tone carried a hint of self-deprecation, which was hard to ignore. Plus, I have a family. His voice grew heavier with that admission. I've got a wife and a little kid. Right now, taking care of them is my top priority, so I can't just up and quit. His eyes reflected a mix of exhaustion and deep responsibility toward his family. That weight seemed to press down even more heavily on his shoulders. Listening to Mark, my chest grew tight. I deeply respected his determination to endure for his family, but I couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on him. To put up with someone like Greg, just to support his family. This guy must be under so much pressure. Mark had likely been suppressing his own feelings, enduring silently, to provide for those he loved. But imagining the sacrifices he must have made brought an unbearable sadness over me. That's incredible. I don't think I could handle it, I said honestly. You don't have a choice when you've got a family. That's just how it is. Mark replied with a weary smile. But then, what he said next completely caught me off guard. Still, you can't let people like Greg walk all over you forever, right? With that, Mark opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small recorder. This? It's recordings of Greg's problematic comments over time. I've been collecting them for a while now. I was stunned by his revelation. Mark wasn't just enduring, he was quietly preparing to fight back against Greg. What do you plan to do with that? I asked, my voice barely steady. I haven't decided yet. But when the time comes, I'm hoping this might help change things, even just a little. His eyes held not only weariness but a glimmer of resolve. I quickly responded. Can you let me hear it? I want to know what he's been saying. Mark hesitated for a moment but, seeing my serious expression, finally nodded. All right. I'll play it for you. Just, don't be too shocked. He pulled a small recorder out from his desk drawer and pressed the play button. From the recorder came Greg's voice. Hey, don't screw this up, especially since you're just a high school graduate. That's why people like you are such a hassle. Well, lucky for you, I'm here. Otherwise, someone like you would have been fired a long time ago. You should be grateful. If you can't deliver results, it's better for the company if you just quit. You get that, right? Hearing those words, I was left speechless. At last, I understood the reason why Jack came home and uttered that one devastating sentence. If someone had to hear this every day, it would break anyone's spirit. So, what do you think? This is Greg's daily routine, Mark said. His words carried a weight that could be interpreted as both resignation and resolve. Even so, I understood why he had continued recording. I stared at the recorder, carefully choosing my words before speaking. And yet, you kept documenting it all. That's right. On my own, I couldn't do much. But with this, I thought I might be able to speak up when the time comes. Mark gave a wry smile and put the recorder back in his pocket. His profile revealed a determination not just to endure, but to try and change the situation, even if just a little. I took a deep breath, replaying Greg's words in my head. Thinking about how much humiliation Mark must have endured and how much Jack had been hurt on his first day made my chest tighten. As long as someone like Greg is in charge, this company has no hope of getting better. Greg wasn't just an individual problem, he was a symbol of the deep-rooted issues plaguing this workplace. Because of him, people like Jack and even talented employees like Mark were suffering. I couldn't let this continue. I felt anger and a sense of purpose welling up inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was a resolve to protect Jack, Mark, and the future of this company. For Jack to have a safe place to work, I can't let someone like Greg continue unchecked. Mark's recordings were undoubtedly strong evidence. But it might not be enough to corner someone like Greg. I needed a more decisive plan to hold him accountable for his actions. I'll make sure Greg is removed and this company changes. Not just for Jack. For Mark and everyone else in this workplace, I felt it was my responsibility to act. Turning to Mark, I thanked him sincerely and made a vow to myself. I'll create a place where Jack can return and work without fear. To do that, I'll be the one to change this situation. With that resolve burning inside me, I began calmly planning my next steps. The real battle was just beginning. After finishing my conversation with Mark, I waited for the right moment and stepped away from my desk. In the office, employees were busy answering phones and moving around with documents in hand. Amid the hustle, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. Opening my contact list, I stared at a particular name for a moment before pressing the call button with determination. The call connected, and a composed male voice came through. "Ryan, it's been a while. What's going on?" The voice belonged to someone I had worked with in the past. He was now a major shareholder in this company, with significant influence. "Sorry for the sudden call. Do you have a moment to talk?" "Of course. Tell me what's going on." I briefly explained the situation, detailing Greg's problematic behavior. I also mentioned the existence of Mark's recordings and described the toxic atmosphere in the workplace. "I see. That's something we can't overlook. Ryan, I trust what you're telling me." Hearing those words, I felt a wave of relief. He continued, "Leave it to me. I'll take action immediately." After the call ended, a mix of anticipation and nervousness filled me. I was confident that this step would be the catalyst for change. Before long, the atmosphere in the office seemed to shift momentarily. Looking up, I saw Greg approaching with a stern expression. Noticing this, the surrounding employees quickly averted their eyes and pretended to focus on their work. "Jack, I need to talk to you." With that one sentence, the tension in the room thickened even more. But I remained calm, standing up without showing any signs of nervousness. "It's starting to move." From Greg's demeanor and timing, it was clear that the major shareholder had taken action and sent instructions. This was the moment of truth, and I steeled myself for what lay ahead. Greg approached with a stern expression, glaring at me as he began to speak. "Jack, there's going to be an emergency shareholder meeting tomorrow. Not that it's any concern of a rookie like you." At those words, I felt a jolt of surprise inside. It hadn't been long since I'd called the major shareholder, yet things were already in motion. Greg, however, quickly smirked and continued in a tone dripping with sarcasm. Which means I'm going to be busy preparing for tomorrow. So, you're going to finish all of today's remaining work for me. His words sparked anger in me, but I knew I couldn't let it show. I needed to stay in character as Jack, responding calmly and professionally. Understood. Please let me know what needs to be done. Greg snorted mockingly and dumped a towering stack of paperwork on my desk before walking away. Do your best, high school graduate. As I watched him leave, I took a deep breath and turned my focus to the task at hand. Sitting down at my desk, I began tackling the mountain of paperwork, one document at a time. But no matter how much I worked, it was clear this was an impossible task. Greg had deliberately assigned me an unreasonable workload as a form of harassment. At that moment, Mark noticed my struggle and walked over. Jack, are you okay? There's no way you can handle all this by yourself. I'll manage somehow. I replied, though the sheer volume of paperwork made it obvious that I couldn't. Mark pulled up a chair beside me and sat down. All right, I'll help. That's what teammates are for, right? Grateful but feeling guilty, I hesitated. But you must be exhausted too. Don't worry about it. If we don't finish this by tomorrow, Greg will just have more to say. Let's get this done quickly so we can both go home. His words lifted my spirits, and together we focused on clearing the workload. By the time the clock struck midnight, we had finally finished everything. Despite the exhaustion, there was a strange sense of accomplishment in having tackled it together. That's the last of it. Good job, Mark said. Thank you so much. I couldn't have done it without you, I replied earnestly. Don't mention it. Now, make sure you get some rest. Mark smiled as he began packing up, and I followed suit. On the way home, a mix of anticipation and anxiety about the upcoming shareholder meeting churned within me. But for Jack's sake, I needed to ensure that the next step was solid. Tomorrow is the day. I'll make sure Greg is held accountable. With that resolve, I hurried home. It was close to midnight when I arrived. As I opened the door, I noticed the lights in the living room were still on. Realizing Jack had stayed up waiting for me, I felt a pang of guilt. Ryan, you're late. What were you doing so late? Jack, dressed in sweats and sitting on the sofa, looked at me with worry in his eyes. Seeing my tired face must have deepened his concern. There was more work than I expected. But it's fine, I said, forcing a smile as I took off my shoes and hung up my suit jacket. Jack stood up and walked over, his voice small as he asked, Are you really not overdoing it? His words made me pause for a moment. Even though I was acting for his sake, worrying Jack wasn't what I intended. That's why I responded gently. By tomorrow, everything will be resolved. Don't worry. Jack still looked uneasy, but as he studied my expression, he seemed to sense something and didn't press further. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and continued. More importantly, let's go to the office together tomorrow. I'll make sure everything is ready for you to return to where you belong. Together? Jack's eyes widened in surprise, and I nodded firmly. Yes, together. Trust me. Though hesitant, Jack listened closely to my words. After a while, he gave a small nod and finally let a faint look of relief cross his face. All right. If you say so. I'll trust you. Hearing that, I exhaled deeply in my heart. The plan for tomorrow was solid. I would ensure this would mark a fresh start for Jack. That night, as I sipped coffee in the quiet living room, I mentally reviewed the plan. The major shareholder had taken action, and everything was in place to expose Greg's misconduct. This will give Jack, Mark, and everyone else a safe place to work again. With that determination in my heart, I set my coffee cup down on the table. Tomorrow was the day. Everything would change. The next morning, I left the house with Jack by my side. As we put on our shoes at the door, I glanced at Jack, who looked slightly nervous. Last night, when I told Jack, let's go to the office together, he was initially hesitant, but now he seemed to have made up his mind. Are you sure everything will be okay? Jack asked, his voice tinged with worry. Placing a hand on his shoulder, I nodded. It'll be fine. I'll end this today. Hearing that, Jack exhaled softly and set his face with determination. We walked side by side toward the company. As the building came into view, the sound of a low engine rumbled from behind us. Turning around, I saw a sleek, black luxury car slowing to a stop. The car came to a stop just behind us, and the driver stepped out, opening the rear passenger door. Out stepped a man in an elegant suit. It was James. With his well-groomed hair and commanding presence, he radiated an aura that shifted the atmosphere instantly. James walked toward us with a calm smile. Good morning, Ryan. And you must be Jack. Jack's eyes widened in surprise at the sudden appearance, but I quickly responded. Good morning, James. Thank you for today. Not at all. I've reviewed everything you told me, and I'll handle it personally. His words eased the tension in my chest slightly. James's support would be the key to winning today's battle. Jack still looked uncertain, but James's gentle tone continued. Your brother is incredible, you know. He's gone to great lengths for you. Jack averted his eyes briefly before giving a small nod. My brother always protects me. James nodded in satisfaction before leading us toward the company entrance. This day would undoubtedly become unforgettable for both of us. With James, we passed through the company entrance and made our way to the shareholder meeting venue. James's dignified stride naturally exuded authority, drawing surprised looks from employees as we passed by. The weight of his presence shifted the atmosphere in an instant. Beside me, Jack shrank slightly, overwhelmed, but I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and spoke. It's okay. Walk tall. Jack nodded slightly, straightening his back a little. As we walked down the hallway, the stares of employees began to gather on us. While they were undoubtedly surprised by James's presence, the sight of the two of us, looking so alike, seemed to draw even more attention. As we passed, I could hear whispers. Wait, isn't that James? Isn't that the new hire? And, are those two twins? The murmurs made me smile inwardly. I had expected to attract attention, and I knew this was the first step in driving the plan forward. Being noticed is part of the plan. Don't let it bother you, I said to Jack. Hearing this, Jack seemed to relax a little, matching my stride as we continued toward the venue. When we arrived at the shareholder meeting room, several employees and executives were already present. The room buzzed with quiet tension, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. As my eyes scanned the space, they landed on Greg. At first, Greg didn't notice us, but gradually, his gaze shifted in our direction. When he finally saw us, his face twisted in shock. He looked back and forth between me and Jack, frozen in place, his voice cracking as he muttered. What the hell? Why are there two of them? Seeing his stunned reaction, I allowed myself a calm, confident smile. You'll understand soon enough. Greg's face visibly paled, confusion and anxiety written all over it. I didn't miss a single detail as I, James, and Jack made our way to the shareholder seats. James led us to a section of the room where a long, polished table and luxurious chairs were arranged. As we took our seats, I could feel the intensity of the stares around us increase. Jack fidgeted uncomfortably in his seat, but I placed a steadying hand on his shoulder to reassure him. It's okay. From here on, leave everything to me. Jack nodded slightly, his gaze returning to the front of the room. James, seated beside us, watched as the remaining shareholders and executives took their places. Moments later, a voice announced the start of the meeting. From the podium, Mr. Anderson, the president, bowed deeply to the shareholders before speaking in a calm, measured tone. Thank you for gathering here on such short notice. Today, at the proposal of our major shareholder, James, We are holding an emergency shareholder meeting." A murmur spread through the room. Employees and executives alike seemed unsettled by the sudden meeting, while James watched the scene with calm composure. Mr. Anderson continued, quieting the room. "The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the findings of an internal investigation and address the issues reported. Details will be shared by the individual James has chosen to present." At those words, every gaze in the room turned toward me. I felt Jack take a sharp breath beside me, but I stood up calmly and made my way to the podium. As I stood on the stage, I could feel the silence in the room grow heavier. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Greg's eyes widen in panic, beads of sweat forming on his brow. This is it, the final stage. For Jack, for Mark, and for this company, I'll reveal the truth. I took a deep breath before speaking into the microphone. Thank you all for gathering here. Today, I'd like to report on a matter that requires immediate attention. The room grew even quieter as everyone held their breath. Looking over the silent crowd, I began to speak. First, I'd like to share what happened to my brother, Jack, during the recent orientation. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Some executives, realizing Jack was seated among the shareholders, exchanged puzzled glances. During the orientation, Jack was told by Greg, "People with only high school diploma are a disgrace to this company. Go home." As a result, he was forced to leave the event. My words sent a ripple of shock through the room. Greg's face twisted into a grimace that was visible even from the stage. "However, that is just one example," I continued. "Greg's inappropriate behavior wasn't confined to the orientation, it has been a regular occurrence." With those words, I held up the recorder in my hand. This is a compilation of statements made by Greg, recorded by one of the employees. I connected the recorder to the pre-prepared speaker and pressed play. "Hey, don't mess up, especially as a high school graduate. This is why people without degrees are such a pain. If you can't deliver results, it's better for the company if you just quit. You understand that, don't you?" As the voice echoed through the room, a ripple of shock swept over the audience. Executives exchanged uneasy glances, and shareholders frowned deeply. I didn't let the momentum falter and continued. These statements not only severely undermine employee morale but also have a profound impact on the overall performance of the organization. I held up the documents in my hand, pointing toward the data. For the past few years, this company's sales have been declining, a fact we're all aware of. Could it not be argued that a deteriorating work environment is a contributing factor? A new wave of murmurs rippled through the shareholders. Many began flipping through their documents, while a few executives looked down in visible discomfort. From the stage, I could see Greg's face growing paler by the second. Greg wiped the sweat from his brow, his voice trembling as he struggled to form words. His speech was halting, and it was clear he couldn't hide his panic. Looking up at the stage with a frantic expression, Greg raised his voice in a desperate attempt to speak. This is all a misunderstanding. I don't remember saying any of that, and this recording could have been edited." All eyes in the room turned toward Greg. Desperately wiping away sweat, he scrambled to come up with excuses. Besides, these were just jokes. If the employees took them seriously, then that's their problem. His words only fueled the murmurs in the room, which now carried an air of disbelief. Remaining calm, I leaned toward the microphone and replied in a sharp, steady tone. "These so-called jokes are far too malicious. The recordings proved that this wasn't an isolated incident but a pattern of behavior." I raised the documents higher, ensuring everyone in the room could see them. Greg, realizing his defense was crumbling, raised his voice in desperation. But wait. You've engaged in misconduct yourself." Greg shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You impersonated your brother to gather information, that's blatant dishonesty. Someone like you has no right to stand here and lecture me like this." The room fell silent for a moment at Greg's accusation. He glared at me with a triumphant expression, as if he had finally turned the tables. But I didn't flinch. Remaining composed, I spoke firmly. "You're right. I did pose as Jack to gather this information. If that is deemed improper, I am prepared to accept the consequences." The room began to buzz again with whispers and murmurs. Greg, sensing a victory, smirked at me. But, I continued, meeting his gaze directly, I had a valid reason for my actions, one that I must share with everyone here today. I took a moment to let the silence settle, scanning the room before speaking. I am also a shareholder in this company. The moment those words left my mouth, a stunned silence fell over the room. Greg's face turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "What did you just say?" The shareholders erupted in whispers, while the executives wore expressions of shock and confusion. Turning back to Greg, I continued in a calm but firm voice. "As a shareholder, it is my responsibility to ensure the company operates with integrity. Your actions have caused significant harm to this organization, and I cannot allow them to continue." Greg's face twisted with despair, his confidence now completely shattered. As silence blanketed the room, I took a deep breath and began to share the story of my past and my brother, Jack. Before we go any further, I need to explain why my brother Jack and I are here today. I let my gaze sweep over the room before continuing. Our parents passed away in a car accident during my senior year of college. The atmosphere in the room grew even heavier. I continued speaking without pause. Not only did we lose our parents, but Jack was severely injured in the same accident and faced a long hospital stay. Days spent watching my brother in a hospital bed after losing our family, the only choice I had left was to support him. I glanced at Jack, who sat quietly with his gaze lowered. Offering him a small, reassuring smile, I turned back to the audience. After losing our parents, we had no choice but to support each other as a family. I graduated college and decided to work at a securities firm to provide for my brother. I recounted my days at the firm and my fateful meeting with James. That was when a significant turning point came into my life, my meeting with James, the major shareholder of this company. James nodded calmly, listening to my story. To gain James's trust, I put everything on the line. I invested the entirety of the insurance payout we received after losing our parents into this company. My words sparked murmurs throughout the room again. I raised my voice slightly to carry over the whispers. That investment was a life-defining decision for me. James recognized my resolve and entrusted me with managing his assets. Today, I run a private fund, where I oversee the management of James's investments. After his release from the hospital, Jack aimed to return to college. However, the loss of our family and the toll of his extended hospital stay made continuing his studies impossible, and he was left with no choice but to withdraw. I paused, then continued. After Jack's release from the hospital, he aimed to return to college. But the emotional toll of losing our family and his prolonged hospital stay made it impossible for him to continue his education. Ultimately, he had no choice but to drop out. At those words, Jack took a small breath and lifted his head. I turned my gaze back to the audience and continued with conviction. I glanced at Jack, recalling all the effort he had poured into overcoming his struggles. Even so, Jack never gave up. During his recovery, he continuously worked toward his future, searching for ways to move forward. Images of Jack studying at his desk while facing immense challenges filled my mind. Despite everything, he focused on supporting the family and stayed determined. Jack resolved to carve out his own path and chose to join this company as his new beginning. I addressed the audience with a firm voice. Jack joined this company to pursue his dreams. That was his right. For someone to take that away from him was something I could not overlook. In the corner of my vision, I saw Jack nod slightly, his resolve strengthening. That moment reaffirmed my purpose. I stand here today because I believe in this company's potential for a better future, one where young people like Jack can work with confidence and chase their dreams. When I finished speaking, the room fell silent. Greg's face was as pale as a sheet, his gaze darting around as he muttered to himself, his words inaudible. James nodded approvingly and raised his eyes to meet mine, his expression steady. Just as Jack has faced challenges, others in this company are enduring struggles of their own. Creating a safe and supportive environment for everyone is what I can do now. As I stepped down from the stage, the room remained enveloped in silence. Shareholders flipped through their documents, carefully examining the contents. Mr. Anderson stood and resumed the meeting. The agenda for today's shareholder meeting has been outlined in the materials already distributed to you. We ask that you review them and make your decision accordingly. Mr. Anderson's voice was calm, though a subtle tension underpinned his words. The materials detailed proposals for Greg's dismissal and a reassessment of company personnel. Greg, still attempting to resist, rose to his feet and began to stammer out a defense, his voice trembling. Wait. Please. This is all a misunderstanding. Admittedly, some of my words might have been misinterpreted. But everything I said was for the good of the company. The shareholders turned icy gazes toward him. Not a single one showed any hint of sympathy. James rose slowly, his voice steady but firm as he addressed Greg. Greg, you need to stop trying to defend yourself. If you truly care about the company, the best course of action would be to acknowledge your mistakes and take responsibility. Greg was left speechless. He sank back into his seat, wiping cold sweat from his brow, his defeated posture signaling that he had begun to accept the inescapable reality. Mr. Anderson moved the meeting to the voting phase, addressing the shareholders. Now, all those in favor of the proposal, please raise your hand. Nearly every hand in the room went up without hesitation. Seeing this, Greg's face grew even paler. His lips quivered as he lowered his head in silence. Are there any objections? Not a single voice rose in dissent. Then, I hereby declare this proposal approved. We will proceed promptly with Greg's dismissal and the subsequent review of company personnel. A collective sigh of relief spread through the room. Jack gently tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Thank you, really, thank you." I gave him a small nod and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Greg was escorted out of the room, shoulders slumped. His once overbearing demeanor had completely crumbled, leaving him a pitiful figure. This marks the first step toward creating a workplace where Jack, Mark, and everyone else can confidently look to the future. I thought as I turned to James. Bowing deeply, I said, "Thank you so much for your support. It's you who took action." "Your speech was remarkable," James replied warmly. His words filled me with gratitude, and I turned to look at Jack. From here, his future could begin to shine a little brighter. The battle to bring a new beginning to this company had reached a significant turning point. A few days after the shareholder meeting, the day of Jack's return to work arrived. Seeing the nervous look on his face, I lightly patted his shoulder. "You'll be fine. This is where you belong. Hold your head high." Jack gave a shy smile and adjusted his suit collar. We parted at the door, and he left for work with renewed confidence. That evening, my phone rang. It was Jack. "Hey, Ryan, Mark wanted me to thank you," he said. "Tell Ryan I'm grateful." Hearing Jack's cheerful voice over the phone made me smile. Sounds like Mark's finally feeling a little less burdened. Now it's your turn to focus on your work and do your best. Of course. I'm going to grow enough to repay everything Mark's done for me. Jack's determined tone gave me a sense of closure. Over the following weeks, Jack began sharing more positive updates about the company. Without Greg, the workplace atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Employees were more engaged, openly sharing ideas, and new projects were quickly taking off. Ryan, the new manager, Harry, is super approachable. "Everyone says it's so much easier to work now," Jack said one day. Jack himself was gradually growing more confident in his role. One evening, he spoke proudly during dinner. "Hey, Ryan, I finished that task I was assigned." Even Mark complimented me. Hearing that, I felt a wave of relief and chuckled. "That's great. Remember, trust is built step by step. Don't forget that." "I know." "Thanks," Jack replied with a grin. Watching Jack grow as a professional and regain his confidence filled me with quiet satisfaction. Seeing him smile again and look toward the future with hope was the greatest reward. That was what made me happiest of all. One evening, Jack said something at home. "Ryan, I'll never forget that day. I'm here now because you stood up for me." Smiling, I replied, "All I did was give you a push. The rest was all you." The living room was filled with a warm, peaceful atmosphere. Looking out at the starry sky, I silently vowed, no matter what path Jack chooses in the future, I'll always have his back. Our future will only grow brighter from here. With the bond of family and the power of belief in our hearts, we took the first step toward a new beginning.